Welcome everybody. We think we'll just give it a few more seconds while a few more people log on. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us for the first biodiversity briefing of GCBC. That's the Global Centre on Biodiversity for Climate. While a few more people log on, I will just remind you that GCBC is a research programme funded by the British government, particularly managed by DEFRA, the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. My name is Dr. Jamie Gordon. I work for DAI Global. I'm part of a team at DAI who support DEFRA in the administration and implementation of the fund. I'd like to have you all with us, and a particular warm welcome to RGC3 grantees, the new cohort of grantees who are beginning their research with GCBC funding any day now, I think. I can just see one or two people joining still. Okay, should we move to some housekeeping? Okay, this session is being recorded and may be shared in total or in part publicly. A copy of the recording will be sent to all grantees. Please keep your microphones on mute unless you want to speak. Although we encourage you during the session, when questions arise, to put those in the chat. Please put questions in the chat. You may have your camera on if you wish, but it's not required. Okay, I think we should move to the overview. So, as I've already said, my name is Dr. Jamie Gordon, the lead at GCBC, the biodiversity lead. I have particular responsibility for understanding the lessons that are emerging from their various projects and helping bring them together so they have wider applicability, which is what these biodiversity briefings are all about, sharing lessons and making them more widely useful. Today we have two presenters and a moderator who will do most of the talking. First, allow me to introduce to you Dr. Aster Gebrekirstos. Aster is a senior scientist at ICRAF, now operating under the brand name Landscape Alliance. She is principal investigator of the GCBC project Multifunctional Agroforestry for Ethiopia. She is speaking to us today from Ethiopia. Her work focuses on generating evidence and implementation pathways that link science, policy, and practice. And she has interest in multifunctional agroforestry, landscape restoration, biodiversity conservation, and climate resilience. Her project, Multifunctional Agroforestry for Ethiopia, is now in its final year. We're joined from Cambodia by Dr. Emiel de Lange. He is a social research and conservation partnership advisor at the Wildlife Conservation Society program in Cambodia. His role brings together social science to inform and evaluate conservation programs with the development of partnerships with indigenous communities and indigenous people in civil society, enabling transformative change through the co-production of knowledge. That's our two speakers. The discussion between the speakers will be moderated by Dr. Elizabeth Cottier-Cook. She's Professor of Marine Biology, specialising in seaweed biosecurity at the Scottish Association for Marine Science, or SAMS as we know it. She's also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Biology. She's published over 120 peer-reviewed papers and is currently leading the GCB-funded programme Global Seaweed SUPERSTAR, which has partners in Malaysia and Indonesia. Liz won't be presenting as such, she'll be moderating. So I will just give you a very, very brief outline of what a project entails, because you'll see from that her experience is very relevant to this discussion, and hope she'll bring that experience into the moderated discussion. As she said, but the ocean is experiencing unprecedented loss in biodiversity. wild seaweed support high biodiversity, yet they are predicted to lose up to 71% of their current distribution by 2100. Sustainable seaweed cultivation offers a nature-based climate resilient solution to protect, restore, and conserve wild seaweeds globally. The industry also benefits the livelihoods of over 6 million farmers, particularly smallholders and women in developing countries in Southeast Asia and globally. Our project aims to support these farmers' livelihoods, develop climate-resilient seaweed cultivars, launch a global seaweed conservation strategy, and develop novel approaches for seaweed resource management. And she says that her program is now in its final stages, with the grand finale being planned for the upcoming UN Climate COP31 conference in Turkey in November. Good luck with that, Liz. Sounds great. After the two presenters have spoken, we'll hand over to Liz to moderate the discussion. Then we'll have a Q&A, so that's put your questions in the chat as you go along. And then we'll move to some closing remarks from Dr. Dan McGonigal, who is Head of International Biodiversity and Climate Research at DEFRA, Department for Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs. I think with that, we can hand on to the first speaker. Aster, over to you.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, James, for the kind introduction, and the GCBC team for the opportunity, to share our experience and also to learn from our GCBC partners and all that. Today, I'm going to present about lessons learned. I'm not going to speak about the project, and the achievements. So I would start with what does it take to translate research into practice and policy. Just to give you some context, our project worked across contrasting landscapes. Landscapes including the UNESCO heritage site of Gedio and in Oromia, and emerging agroforestry site in Tigray and also in Amhara. As you can see here, the picture depicts a Gedio, very diverse agroforestry system, and down there from Tigray, and it's similar also in Amhara. So we didn't just simply compare landscapes. We just asked questions. Can biodiversity-rich agroforestry systems improve livelihoods and climate resilience? What does it take for people, biodiversity, and livelihoods to thrive together? And can those be co-created elsewhere? So we have been learning and implementing this project for almost 2.5 years. And we can say that the biodiversity climate livelihood nexus is not a concept. It is a measurable field reality. And we have submitted maybe 7 journal articles around that. I'm not going to talk about these details. But I would like to highlight one thing. Communities maintain biodiversity when it also sustains their livelihoods. So it's based on that concept also we started implementing. So the next question is not longer, simply whether the system works or not. We know it works. But the question is, how do we sustain them? And can this be co-created, adapted, and embedded in policy and practice? So the rest of my lesson, about 4 or 5, will revolve around this question. So, our first lesson sounds simple, but it's not. Relationship is critical. Trust building is critical. Evidence doesn't start from producing data. It starts by, building relationship with the people. Here you can see in the picture, we brought local people, the Abagadas, national leaders, policymakers from all sectors, from national, regional, and all that. And we dialogue. And based on that, we started implementing the project. And this approach, we call it living lab approach. It's not, a lab in a sense of lab. It is an open space that brings communities, researchers, government, and development partners together in a shared space where evidences can be, generated, tested, and adapted in real farmers' situation. So the first lesson is, please engage evidence users before evidence exists, not only where results are ready. Because co-designing, co-creation builds trust and ownership. And ownership drives implementation. And I'm not going to talk about the Living Lab pillars here. We have 4 pillars. And there is one connected principle in that. That is the trust, co-ownership, and adaptive management, adaptive learning. So this is really important. And the next lesson is that just give me a minute, sorry. I'm borrowing someone's office. Yeah, sorry for the interruption. Yeah, the second lesson is that, as I said, the Living Lab approach, it has rural resource centers to create job opportunities, to introduce agroforestry demonstrations and pilots in farmers' lands and all that. And we demonstrate that what we talked about on the landscape. It's not only data, but make it visible in practice. And you can learn that, the diversity here, you can see it. And you'll be amazed, leave alone about the land, about the trees, and about the interaction of different species. They even innovate in a new introduced technology, like the solar panel here for irrigation. And I would like to share that here. Women carries water long distance. And to really mitigate that challenge, we introduced this one. And I was so impressed by their innovation. You see this clause on top. It's deliberate. During peak sun hours, to regulate the water flow, they started their innovation by, covering part of the solar panel by clause. So what we learned is that people, farmers, we learn a lot from them, and communities are not just research participants, they are knowledge partners. And women are really critical in biodiversity. So we talk about gender participation and all that. It's just not ticking boxes. It's very important to address the challenges they face if to really help them do the biodiversity, activities they do, because they are the center of biodiversity activities. That we have also submitted papers, you'll see about the role of women in biodiversity. But what I want to say is that it's biodiversity intervention, helping women is not just simply gender equity. It's more than that. The third lesson is that the best solutions were not in the project design. The importance of flexibility, the importance of co-creation, the importance of co-design. So Living Labs gave us the opportunity to listen to the people, continuous learning and adaptation. During our first negotiations and, with the people, with the Abagedas in Gedio, they told us, the youth are leaving us. Who will maintain this after us? They have the knowledge, but the youth were not interested to continue that practice. So our intervention was, okay, we have to involve the youth, and we started, school program to involve the youth. As you can see the picture. In Tigray, this, he's a priest. He told me, I wish I were 20 years old. I could have done a lot in my household. Yeah. So the demand is there. There are contrasting landscapes that you can learn a lot from the people. So we asked them, what do you want? They told us about the species they want, and the shrubs, and for honey, and the indigenous knowledge they have, and what is lost there. And we generated, created the Rural Resource Center to produce quality seedlings. So co-creation doesn't simply improve the adoption, it improves the research itself by revealing solutions that would not emerge from the project design alone. And I would like to thank GCBC also for allowing that this co-creation and the flexibility while we implement. That is actually, the research design. The fourth lesson is policy. Policy uptake requires more than evidence. It requires presence, trust, and continuous engagement. The reason that we are lucky, we are proud that we informed to the establishment of Ethiopian National Agroforestry Development Strategy from 2026 to 2035 for the next 10 years. And you can see inside this strategy, the Living Lab approach, the Rural Research Center, what we created on the landscape is also inside the policy. This doesn't happen simply, but they were there, the policymakers from the beginning. As you can see, even when we installed the dendrometers on indigenous species, they were with us in the field. Yeah. So it is important milestone, but it's not the end of the journey. The lesson here is that co-ownership of where research happens creates co-ownership of what it finds. So involve policymakers as partners from the beginning. So I think these four pillars, building trust and building the evidence on the landscape, we started. It's enough maybe to build the architecture, but it's not enough to know whether what we have done will hold. This is an honest assessment and reflection. So the next challenge, actually I would like to say the next opportunity is translating policy into landscapes, cascading this national policy into regions and into the landscapes. So the opportunity of staying long enough to learn, adapt, and generate the evidence needed to create resilient landscapes is what's missed here. So final reflections, as I said, the four important lessons from the project is co-design builds trust before evidence exists. Communities are knowledge partners. Traditional knowledge is non-renewable resource. It's very important. We keep that in mind. And they are just not simply, beneficiaries. Co-creation improves both research and practice, and it can influence policy. Policy uptake requires, as I said, more than evidence. But there is one hard truth also I would like honestly to reflect. Nature, research, and funding operate on different time scales. Yeah. The speeds and depths and the impact of nature-based solutions, including agroforestry, it matures with time. Yeah. While policy windows may open within a project like ours, the evidence needed to create resilient landscapes continues to mature with every growing season. So again, the next call is that it's very important to design research and funding approaches that allow evidence to mature, strengthen local capacity, and generate the knowledge needed to create resilient landscapes that people, biodiversity, and livelihoods can sustain together. With that, I would like to say thank you for your attention. If you have any question, you can ask me later. I just presented on behalf of the core team in Ethiopia and also in the UK University of New York. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aster. That was excellent and well timed as well. Thank you. Had a hand gone up from Liz? Do you want to ask something, Liz? No, that was just a clap. Even better. Okay.
Sorry, it was meant to be a clap, and I put my hand up instead.
Well deserved. Thank you very much. So we'll now move from Ethiopia to Cambodia, and I'll hand over to Emiel to speak on behalf of the project he's managing for the Wildlife Conservation Society there. Emiel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, James, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name's Emiel. I'm an advisor and the principal investigator here with the Wildlife Conservation Society in Cambodia. And I'm going to share a few observations and hopefully some insights from our GCBC-funded project, which we call the Salary Cow Project, which we are implementing at WCS together with partners including the Cambodia Indigenous Peoples Organization, the Royal University of Agriculture, and Monash and Oxford Universities. A little bit of context for the project. The kind of key challenge that our project is aiming to address is the lack of recognition for Indigenous knowledge in conservation practice and in policy. But the opportunity that we have with this project comes from the long history of WCS in Cambodia, over 20 years, the co-implementation of a RED Plus project at the Khao Sema Wildlife Sanctuary, together with the Ministry of Environment and 20 Indigenous Bunong communities living in this protected landscape. And within the RED Plus standards, as well as the global biodiversity framework and other policy commitments that the government here has made, there are commitments to implementing conservation in inclusive ways, in ways that respect rights, knowledge, and that are equitable. But on the ground, there is limited capacity, evidence, and the partnerships that would enable application of these standards. And as a result, Indigenous knowledge is often not sufficiently valued, recognized, or included in decision-making. So the approach that we have taken in our project is to build and strengthen a transdisciplinary partnership that would enable us to implement research to document, understand, and value the contributions that Indigenous peoples' knowledges are making to sustaining biodiversity in Khao Sema. And I would invite you all to look for more details about the project, but I just want to pick up a few of the kind of principles that we had in mind when we were designing this project, which I think are relevant for now thinking about how the project may be engaging and influencing decision-making. Firstly, as Aster also mentioned, the importance of the partnerships. And so strengthening the partnerships with Indigenous communities, conservationists, researchers, government, and Indigenous-led civil society has been at the core of the project, and it enables the kind of mutual learning that leads to transformative change in understanding and practice. We also designed the project so that the research would be locally led and led by Indigenous peoples and by the Indigenous communities as much as possible. And one of the big work streams we have is action research, where 3 Indigenous communities are developing their own research agendas. And this is facilitated by researchers at the Indigenous Peoples Organization, or SIPO. You can see some of them pictured here. My colleague, Sanat Rachana, on the left. And having FPIC and the community participation has been at the core of all the project's research activities. And hand in hand with that is the investment that the project is making in the people, in these future research leaders, Indigenous researchers as well, through training, mentorship, scholarships, and exchange visits. And finally, the coordination and engagement with external stakeholders that we are hoping to engage with and influence for the project, most notably the Ministry of Environment, who we've made efforts to get their support and endorsement of the project from the beginning, and who we keep closely in the loop and coordinating with them throughout the project as well. So now I'd like to just draw out some of the ways that these features of the project have enabled us to have influence or successful engagements. Again, firstly, I think thinking about that the decision-making context that the project is hoping to influence, we have a very clear need within the RED Plus project for this kind of evidence and for these partnerships. So there's a very clear pathway there in which the project has been able to influence that practice, and that's seen in the development of a new strategy for the RED Plus project, including the strengthening of partnerships with Indigenous people and Indigenous-led civil society, and also the scaling up of the kinds of research approaches that we're using in this project to other villages that participate in the RED Plus program. These relationships also mean that we can stay very close to the decision-making processes that are happening. And especially the relationship with the Ministry of Environment and with SIPO meant that we were able to take advantage of new decision-making windows and enter into them and make sure that we were able to participate in those decisions. And the key example I'd like to highlight here is that we were able to, with the project support, include SIPO in a working group of the Ministry of Environment, which is focused on heritage demarcation, demarcating and recognizing spiritually and culturally important forest areas and devolving management of those areas to indigenous peoples. And having the research team as part of this work greatly improved the quality of the work and led to much greater recognition for the knowledge of the indigenous communities there. And finally, I think this is a slightly longer term horizon, but the investment in local and indigenous research leadership has sort of gained a lot of interest and traction within Bunong society. And this is evidenced in the huge interest that the research activities are gaining on social media with tens or hundreds of thousands of views. And I think this potentially has the potential to contribute to a longer term shift in perceptions and awareness and recognition of the value of the indigenous people's knowledge within that society as well. So I think altogether, the key insight here again is that evidence is made real through the institutions, the relationships and the communities that are taking ownership of that evidence and that are sort of using it and circulating it and letting it inform their decisions. But also there are other cases where it's been harder to have influence. And this may be where the decision-making processes have been less inclusive or where we didn't have the right relationships to be able to influence them. One example, this is still very much a process that's underway, but so far we've found it challenging to have our evidence inform an ongoing revision of the Cambodian land law, despite having very high quality econometric impact evaluation evidence showing the benefits of indigenous collective land tenure. So there was a misalignment between the evidence timeline and the political decision-making process. Although, as I said, this is still an ongoing process and we are continuing our efforts to engage in that process. So I think, again, just the key high point there being that regardless of the quality of evidence, if those decision-making timelines don't align and if the processes are not inclusive and open to that, then it is difficult to influence those decisions. In summary, we designed the project with uptake in mind from the very beginning. So thinking about not just what evidence do we want to generate, but thinking from the start about who are the actors, who are the partnerships, and what are the institutional decision-making processes where there is demand and requirement and need for this evidence, where the evidence would be taken up enthusiastically and be sort of willing to, and people who would be willing to take it on and use it to inform their practice. Then very much thinking about what relationships and partnerships are required in order to have that influence, not only within the project team, but also with external stakeholders, the communities and Ministry of Environment as well. And investing in the future leaders, as these will be the individuals who would champion the evidence and champion the approaches that are developed here going into the future. Supporting, sorry, I missed one there. Staying close and having these partnerships also allowed us to be more aware of and to respond more effectively to other opportunities to influence decision-making when they arose. Supporting the locally led and indigenous-led knowledge production also encouraged ownership of the evidence and led to a greater sense of legitimacy of that evidence. And so influence depends very much on the ownership of evidence by motivated social actors who are willing to champion that evidence and who can use it in a timely manner within inclusive decision-making processes. So I will wrap up there. There's a QR code to scan for further information about the project. And I look forward to the questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emiel. And if you're rapidly trying to scan that QR code, don't forget the slides will be shared with you, so you can take your time over that. That was excellent, Emiel. Much appreciated. So that's our two presenters who've given their thoughts on evidence to engagement. I'm now going to hand over to Liz, who's going to moderate a 20 or so minute discussion, starting off perhaps with some of her reflections. Can I hand over to you, Liz?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Jamie. And thank you, Aster and Emiel, for some really, really thought-provoking sort of presentations there. I'm sure there will be lots in the audience who are busy typing questions at this moment in time, but I'm here to sort of moderate. It's really excellent to hear some of the sort of key lessons that you've drawn out from both of your programs, and it's nice to see the sort of the overlap, the similarities between my experience as well. I mean, obviously I work in the marine environment, but I work very closely with Indigenous communities. I work a lot with women. There's, 50 to 80% of seaweed farming is done by women in many of these developing countries. So it's really wonderful. Particularly, Aster, you mentioned that the sort of the opportunities and the fact that women are so engaged with the work that you do. But I saw sort of key challenge. One of the sort of key challenges for me that I saw from both of yours was the importance of staying close to your communities, the importance of involving decision makers from the very beginning. Did you already have those connections in place? It's just, I'll go to you first, Aster, and then over to you, Emiel. Did you already have those connections in place, or have you built up new or strengthened existing partnerships? How has that worked? How did you go about building those relationships and getting people involved right at the start? Aster, over to you first, I think.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. I'm sure also other GCBC members here will share what we talked about, the importance of working with people, and also the challenges that we shared, but also some challenges are context specific. So it is, for me, I have been working in this environment, and it was not difficult to access, the policymakers and the regions, and so I can. We have also another projects, so we know them. We have been engaged. So the policy influence, for example, it didn't come just from within 2 years. We have been engaged with them. It was a process that built trust on that. But for this project, what we did was first, we started at the national level. We brought different sectors. We discussed with them about the project and what it is. And they told us, okay, these are the priorities. Actually, we were thinking also to establish multi-stakeholder platform at the national level. And they told us there is existing one. So that's the regions. They told us there is not the region, so you could do it as a region, but there is already existing national platform. So we don't need to do repetition, So at the regional level, also we did the same. And it is not, easy sometimes to access, for example, the traditional leaders like the Abagadas. As a woman, I cannot go there and then ask them to come to our meeting or so. I have to use a man, from the project member of local at the university to invite them. When they come, I have to know also the rules. I was not going to give them my hand and shake. That is not allowed. So it's very important to know their rules. That was my first time there. And I go, okay, but you have to accept some of the things. So these are you learn a lot about, if you respect what they value, if you accept and you change what you can change through time. And also the same thing with women. So that is really important. And we organize site visits from region to region. For women, it's not easy to take them. And then we have to adapt also to really organize around their area. So I think it is to pay attention, to stay close and to listen, really listen what they want. There are, when I say listen, it's not only the words they say, it's what they do, you observe and all that. So I think that's very important.
Thank you so much, Esther. That was, yeah, it's really interesting. I think for us as well, we've been working, I work particularly for this particular project, the SUPERSTAR one, we work in Malaysia, and we've worked with the communities, we've worked with the key researchers, and the researchers have had long lasting, and they've been working with government and the main Department of Fisheries in Sabah for many years, and they've built up that trust and those relationships before we came in, and very much they know the culture, they know who to approach, and they've already got those connections, or they know the right people to ask to build on the new connections. So very much agree with you there. Emiel, what's your experience been in terms of sort of engaging with decision makers within your country and engaging with communities? Did you already have very well established, well, I think you've said you've worked there for 20 years, but so how did you go about establishing new connections, new relationships with different sectors of the government, for example?
Yeah, this is a great question. As you mentioned, I think WCS has been in Cambodia for 20 years and I think already had a relationship with all the project partners, for example, the communities that are participating and the government, particularly the Ministry of Environment, through the kind of framework of the existing RED Plus project. But I think what this project has allowed us to do and how we sort of try to use this project as an opportunity to kind of almost reshape those relationships and bring some kind of transformation into them. So with, for example, CIPO, the Indigenous Peoples Organization, in this case, extending and asking, would we like to partner and co-design a project, allowed us to have a different kind of relationship to the one that we had previously. And again, with the communities, I think going to them and sort of in this approach and asking them, do you want to do an action research and develop your own agendas is very different to the kind of working relationship that was there previously. So there's a kind of transformation in the existing relationships. But I think one other important aspect of the project was the role that WCS has been able to play. And we're only halfway through this project, so I think there's still a lot more that will happen. But as a kind of bridge, bringing together these different actors that maybe weren't yet having a good relationship. And the example I mentioned of CIPO, Indigenous Peoples Organization, coming into this Ministry of Environment working group, WCS was able to act as the bridge there to support that. And that led to this new kind of partnership between the government and CIPO that wasn't there initially.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You mentioned about, staying with you, Emiel, you were saying one of the sort of key challenges has been the sort of mismatch in timing of various reports or this land law revision that you mentioned about not quite having the timing to be able to engage fully with that, or maybe certain decisions being made behind closed doors. And then sort of Aster, you mentioned that you were able to contribute to the Ethiopian National Agroforestry Development Strategy, which is fantastic. So maybe your timing was that little bit more aligned. I mean, I definitely with the project that I'm on, we were looking sort of ahead and just sort of seeing, okay, where, and working with, I'm very lucky in Malaysia, there's sort of a national strategy and what have you that we've been able to sort of feed into, and that was still in the sort of drafting stage, so we were able to as actually aligned. But Emiel, what would you do sort of thinking back, you're saying you're halfway through the project, but thinking back to when you were designing the project, is there something you could have done differently to make sure that you were more aligned with that process, or not? I know we're confined with the length of our programs, but
I think there's always going to be a limit, right, to what you can do. And I think the primary aim for us with the project was to influence the practice within the RED Plus and the relationships with Ministry of Environment. And I don't think this land law revision process was on our radar, when we designed the project. And so, that's these mismatches are there, and I think there's just always going to be limits to what you can do and the relationships that you have and that you can build. And so I think we have to accept that reality sometimes.
Yeah, fair enough. Aster, did you know, was that built into your research proposal? Was that built into your plan that you were going to be influencing this development strategy, or did that come about in the early stages of the program?
Yeah, thank you. For us, the purpose of our project was also to influence practice and policy in a way. But I didn't expect that it will happen in these 3 years, to be honest, the strategy. But, you mentioned about, I wouldn't change the design. I think the design works perfectly in a way. There is one minor thing that also we adapt, because it's co-learning, it's adapting, it's changing. That flexibility, of course, helps me also to change what we design. For example, from the beginning, we said, okay, we will influence 2 woredas in Tigray, scattered different parts in the region. We were so ambitious, but there was nothing on the ground. And the first year, we started planting. We just purchased seedlings because rural resource centers that produce seedlings were not ready. But we failed. And we've learned from that failure, because it was scattered, management is difficult, and the quality of the seedlings were just, we were in a hurry to produce something. So then we changed that design and concentrated in one woreda where we have 50 people, so that we can show, as I said, show the change. Then after that, people will learn, from farmer to farmer. About the policy, we involved them from the beginning. Now, we took them to the sites where we install sensors and all that. And normally we did it, they are still there. Nothing happens because it is based on trust of the local people and also the policymakers. So from the design point of view, I will not do that because, sometimes we think policy takes time, but the reality is, of course, ecological learning takes more time. Creating landscapes, it takes more time and all that. So in terms of design, it's perfect. And I think what will hold because we started with the people and
Yeah. Just looking at time, and Jamie's probably going to put his hand up here. I was just wondering from both of you, you shared some fantastic lessons learned from both of your programs. We've got new research program leaders here in the meeting. If there's one lesson learned from each of you, come to you, Emil, first. If there's one thing that you would recommend to the new batch of researchers coming through, research programs coming through, in a key way in which they can influence decision makers and influence policy from their work, what one thing, put you on the spot, what one thing do you think it would be?
Yeah, I think I just come back again to this focus on the relationships. So building a project around the relationships and keeping close to those relationships, because it's also by listening to others and to partners that you can be adapting to circumstances as they come and responding to opportunities.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. We have regular meetings with all of our stakeholders, and we've got a great advisory board with a whole host of people on, and but also we interact with our seaweed farmers on a monthly basis. We're out there with them, and interacting with them. So I absolutely agree with you on that. But Aster, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think I agree with Emil about the trust, and that relationship is very important. And also when you design, let's not forget the interconnectedness of these challenges of climate, biodiversity, and livelihood. So people, they don't destroy biodiversity for this, because they don't like biodiversity. It's because of livelihood. So we need to address also this challenges when we design projects, but whenever we design about livelihood, we have to involve the people from the beginning. We have to listen to what they want.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. So are we about ready to move on now, Jamie,
we can indeed move on if you wish.
Questions and
Unless there's any
answers.
final thoughts that I mean, you were going to put you on the spot with a couple of questions anyway, but that was really interesting. Thanks for your moderation there, Liz. It was excellent. So we do have time for some questions. We have a couple in the chat. I'll kind of paraphrase them. By all means, read them if you can as well. Anyone else in the audience, now is your time to put a question in the chat. But I think I'll start sort of reversal, not the first question, but the second one, because it actually relates to something that Aster was just finishing off on there. And it's a question from Grant Campbell. And forgive me, Grant, if I paraphrase slightly, but it relates to biodiversity and people. And he sees one of the challenges farmers and farming communities is they want to see the impact that biodiversity has on their landscapes. And of course, we, as well, those of us with scientific backgrounds, probably have lots of different ways in which we think we can measure biodiversity. But and Grant mentioned some of them, but they're quite demanding, perhaps. So this is actually, I should say that Grant is speaking is coming to us from Ethiopia. So I think he's particularly interested in you, Aster, but Emil, you might have something to say about this. It's about how we perhaps demonstrate or measure biodiversity in a sort of real time, to say to people that in the here and now, this is the biodiversity that you have in your landscapes. Do you have any insights that I will say? Grant acknowledged right at the end that this is a silver bullet question. It's probably a difficult one to answer. Any thinking around that? How we make the measurement of biodiversity kind of real to local people and in real time, so it's saying what they've got now, not what's happening in however many years. I hope that's a reasonable paraphrasing of your question, Grant, although I think I made it longer, not shorter. Apologies. Aster, would you care to have a first go at that?
Okay, I try. So, we also measured above ground biodiversity, because biodiversity is also below ground and it's so diverse, right? So we measured above ground biodiversity, and we even, you can measure the tree diversity, the shrub diversity, the herbs, all that sort of things in that. And you would be amazed, when you measure. We looked from the household, distance around the house and far away at different distance. And we'll find even differences along that distance within the household. Yeah. So what we want to measure, that's very important, because measurement has no end. But the most important thing is, what do you measure? Is it going to help you for your project? And for research, I know we can do it. But in this case, we designed the project to bring also the climate resilience and also the livelihood approach. And we found that along the household, there are territories managed by women around the home, which is very diverse. Yeah. When you go for the main territory, you will find cash crops and few trees, but cash, So when you design biodiversity measurement, what I want to say is that you have to look at the livelihood aspect, the gender even aspect, what you want to measure, the soil aspect, a lot of things. So in my opinion, it's possible to measure biodiversity, of course, but I think within 2-3 years, we are not able to measure the soil biodiversity below ground. I'm sure that I have a lot of, that's what I said. We started with questions. We have some lessons, some answers, but better questions. So maybe that is what I can say. Yeah.
Thanks, Aster. Emil, do you have the silver bullet answer to this difficult question of how you measure biodiversity rapidly and in a way which local people can, if you like, understand and see as real?
Yeah, so I will just disclaimer that I'm not a biodiversity scientist, but we do have some interesting biodiversity science happening within our project, which I think can help contribute to this question. So one of the things that we're looking at is the ways in which the indigenous stewardship practices contribute to biodiversity. And so we're focusing very much on the system of rotational agriculture. And so what we've done is sort of mapped out a system of rotational agriculture and different ages of fallow plots as the farmers leave the land to regenerate into forest. And we're sort of measuring the biodiversity in those plots and in those areas. And this is happening over quite a large scale. So one of the kind of innovative techniques that we've figured out to do this is to use drones. So with a drone to take it's called a multispectral photograph. And then you validate that with a sample of vegetation plots to kind of get an estimate of the plant diversity that you find in these areas. And this creates some quite striking images, satellite imagery, which you can combine with satellite images to kind of develop aerial imagery of the farming area. And so that's something that's quite engaging for farmers to see. And the other thing is acoustics. So using acoustics to try and detect different kinds of animals, sounds and species on the farms. And again, that's quite a simple way to kind of understand what biodiversity there is and communicate that with the farmers. But also obviously to hear from them about it, because they have a very good understanding of how the biodiversity is impacting their agriculture, how it's restoring the health of the soil, how it's supporting the conservation of water, and all of these other interconnected things.
Yes, thanks for Emil. In fact, I'm glad you brought up acoustic methods there, because one of our other projects is looking at acoustic monitoring of birds, and that seems to be something which is, I mean, it's technologically relatively sophisticated, but it kind of manifests itself very simply. You record birds, you hear them, and the software tells you how many birds, the bird you have. I imagine that could kind of translate to other to local people. And I think one of their new RGC3 projects led by the Audubon Society is doing something. It's going to be looking at audible measures of bird biodiversity. So interesting stuff. Thank you very much. And I think looks like a only other question from Andrew Smith, that it goes to the very heart of GCBC being as much about equality as anything else. It's about equality in how we go about things and the outputs and outcomes from it. And he's particularly asking, because youth, engaging in youth has been mentioned, he's asking what particular steps are required to engage interest and support of youth for the long term. I'll go first to you, Aster, just to change between the two of you. But equally, it's for Emil. Aster, how do you keep youth engaged long term?
Yeah, I think that's very good question. It's very important to design a project that also fits to youth. We have to be mindful that they are restless, they are really ambitious, and they want really to change quickly. They want that income and all that. So first, when we designed the project, our objective was, okay, we will organize youth, for example, and they will produce seedlings, because it's also very important business in terms of income. But they have to wait 1 year to get that seedling, income from seedlings. So we learned that is not going to sustain the interest of the youth and also the women, both. So we diversified a system like beehives, for example. It comes because they will also generate income at least twice in a year. The vegetables, the onions, all that sort of things that they can have sustained income, every month or every two months, and training and how to save, how to cooperate, how do they manage the business case is really important. It's not only also to train them on production, but also they can be a resource person later on, So I think so far they are very engaged, but what will happen after 3-4 years? That is what I'm saying. We diversified, we created that. What I would say is, diversification and capacity building, really to change the mindset they can change and all that, and to negotiate with the government to help them, to give them longer term of, cooperatives. Normally they give for 3 years. We are negotiating with the government, give them for longer term so that they can stay in this business. So I think these are quick reflections. And Back to you.
Shall I go, James?
Yes, please. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. From our side, I think, as I mentioned, I showed a photo of two of our young research team. So having that investment in people who are from those communities to take on and lead the research, lead the design of the research, and access opportunities to develop their careers as researchers as well, has been, I think, one of the most inspiring elements of the project for me. So, and then also listening to them, because sometimes youth, they have different ways of communicating and different ways of seeing things. But I mentioned the reach that they're gaining on social media, and so I think having those young people, empowered here to kind of talk to their elders, listen to stories, understand the knowledge that's being lost, if I'm speaking frankly. But then they're finding new ways to engage with that and to share it through new media. So I think that's something that's creating a lot of interest among young people, both in the communities and in the wider society there.
Okay, many thanks. I think we have to start moving towards wrapping up. We've got just a couple more things to touch on, although right at the end I noticed the humdinger of a question that's come in, which asks about how projects scale up. Well, that's a huge question. I think perhaps we can, I think we'll be working on that in other ways. Thank you for that question, Simon. If anyone wants to attempt to answer that in the chat, they're welcome to, but we just have to move on right now. So the penultimate thing is to remind you, this is the first, what will be a series of biodiversity briefings, perhaps happening every 2 or 3 months. But we want to hear from you. If you're working either on GCBC projects, or even if you are outside of them, but you know about their work, what kind of things are you seeing or you think would be useful to hear from more than one project? What topics would you like in these biodiversity briefings? You can post a message in the chat, or you can email us, or there are lots of other ways. Because the whole point about this is to begin to explore what you're doing in the context of what other projects are doing. So we welcome your feedback on the session in particular, but especially any thoughts on what you think would be useful topics. And with that, with the few minutes we have left, I want to hand over to Dr. Dan McGonigal, who leads GCBC from DEFRA side, from the British government. And he's just going to wrap up with a few thoughts. And there he is on screen. So Dan, can I hand straight over to you?
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks very much, Emiel and Aster, for your presentations and for all the contributions from the chat. That was super interesting, and I'm really pleased to see this series of webinars kicking off. I think this is really useful, and I think it really helps us to share experiences from across the different GCBC projects. I'll just say 3 things really. The first is just actually how much what you're presenting resonated with my own experience. And I've worked domestically and internationally throughout my career on both sides of the equation, sort of designing and implementing research programs from within government and from within research institutes, but also being the recipient of that as well, in terms of actually bringing in knowledge and trying to use it to shape policy. And actually all of what you're saying really sort of resonated with experiences I've had from actually working on UK policy. So the importance of things like building relationships and understanding different people's perspectives and keeping evidence tangible and such like, all of that is super relevant, and I think learning that we should be applying everywhere. So that's really good to see. So just picking up on those themes that we heard, I've just listed a few of them. These are all sorts of things that we've been obviously trying to build into the way that GCBC is designed. We're a kind of quite an important part of the stage of the program at the moment. We're looking forwards to the next few years of the program. We are currently designing our next research call. We're also refreshing our research strategy at the moment. So building in some of this learning will be absolutely key to that in terms of informing the way that we shape the program as it moves forward. So I think we are the transdisciplinary approach, which involves co-design and working with people and communities, but doing that, I think, at multiple scales, from the very local scale, building those relationships with communities, building in indigenous knowledge and knowledge from women, from young people into the way that we work, but also then doing that sort of regionally and nationally and transnationally in terms of the way that we're trying to shape approaches and get adoption through the work that we do. Bringing together one of the other things I think I heard from the presentations is sort of importance of kind of seeing stuff that's tangible in the field and having things that you can demonstrate. So I think that's one of the superpowers of GCBC. How do we mobilize those case studies, those examples, in the way that we operate at the kind of the larger program scale? And what can we do sitting in the center of it all within DEFRA and within DAI to build up the kind of hub level activities that help you get those messages out to a broader audience? So we'll think about all of that. I'll stop there because I think we're on time. But huge thanks to colleagues at DAI and Jamie for sharing, and really looking forward to the next one of these.
Thank you, Dan. I don't think the thanks should be for me. I think my job was easier. I think Emiel, Aster and Liz all did a fantastic job. Many thanks, and we look forward to all seeing you and more people at the next iteration. I can see some suggestions already coming in too. Thank you very much. I think with that, we say good day and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.